So, good afternoon, everyone. Let's go ahead and discuss here the Java 2D game basics. Now, we will talk about the basics, only the basics. Do not actually try to set your expectation too high na in which gagawa tayo ng mga Unity level or Unreal Engine level na type ng mga games natin dito. I'm just going to at least introduce to you the different methods, the way on how we import some sprites sa mismong game na gagawin natin. Now, in terms of the game development in Java, we have here, ang Java kasi, isa yan sa mga naging popular na programming language up until now. It's actually, even though it was created way back 1995, kaya nga kung natatandaan nyo na introduce ko rin sa inyo yung tinatawag natin WORA, diba? Write once, run anywhere. It can actually create a lot of things using this programming language. Yun nga, making it incredibly useful in a world awash with different devices, each running on different architectures. Now, kagaya nitong mga to, there are some particular games that was developed all throughout the years in which was developed by Java. And I just would like to introduce them to you. Although, hindi ganitong level yung gagawin natin. Okay? Kasi, of course, hindi kasya sa 4-week discussion lang ito. Kung tutuusin na 2 hours lang tayo every week. Yan. Kaya, i-introduce ko pa rin naman sa inyo yung mga methods na importante natin gamitin. Especially, we will still be using object-oriented programming concepts for coding sa part na to. Number 1 is what we call the Wakfu na game. So, pwede nyo itong i-search, yung Wakfu, kung paano siya. Basically, it's an MMORPG. So, para siyang Ragnarok, di ba? Napansin nyo. It was created by Java, kung napapansin nyo yan. We also have the Worms, Space Oddity. And ewan ko kung nalaro nyo rin to, pero there are a lot of versions dito sa Worms na to. Meron yung Wii version, meron yung Java version din, in which ang naabutan kong nilalaro ko dati dito is all about the Java version. So, dito. Yung Worms na yan. It's okay, Mr. Dominguez. Number 3, Saints Row 2. The classic Saints Row game na parang GTA style nung araw. Ito, naabutan ko rin to kasi these are actually the games that we are playing way back nung time na kausuhan ng Nokia. Itong mga ganitong games. Yan. So, GTA, parang GTA style siya. Saints Row 2, mobile. Ang Java kasi dati, jar files ang ginagamit. Ngayon kasi APK for Android, di ba? So, although we can develop games for Android, pero we still need to at least, install a lot of dependencies and another software, which is the Android Studio, which will take up a lot of time na naman to install. And at the same time, baka hindi kayanin ng mga unit ninyo or computers ninyo ang development ng mga Android. So, for now, focus talaga tayo sa Java. Kasi once you have the basics of the programming of game development, eventually, matututo na rin kayo pagdating nyo sa Unity, in which you will learn C# or C++ programming. Yan. Mas madali nyo na siyang ma-implement kasi you already know how to do that in Java, which is a very advantageous thing for us. This is, basically the way on how we catapult students to introduce themselves with game development, especially if this is your first time. Yan. Another game here that was developed using Java programming is the SimCity. Not the SimCity na alam natin ngayon, yung magarbo ang graphics. Pero basically, this is actually the old, yung mga pang phone na SimCity. Number 5 is Spiral Knights. Yan. One of the game I have played, pero sa Steam na to mga Spiral Knights na to. Yan, Steam na to. And number 6, Runescape, which is actually very, very simple lang siya. It's Java 3D, FYI. So, Java 3D po yung mga ganyan. Different way to code din, kung tutuusin. Parang Java 2D rin, pero just additional topics para dyan. Pero hindi tayo kasi mag-fall under dito because bakit kapag gagawa ng Java 3D files or Java 3D games if you can actually do that in Unity? Diba? So, yun yung magiging question dyan later on. Kasi mas mahirap gawin ito kapag ka-Java. Unlike pag Unity, drag and drop mo lang itong mga to. If you know how to 3D model, you can just simply model them on your own without even having or with just by having a knowledge on how to do that. That's number 6. It was developed by Java. And surprisingly, this is of course the most famous game of all time, in which me alone favorite ko rin to, and I up until now nilalaro ko pa rin to, to be honest with you guys. Minecraft, it was 'di ba meron yung Bedrock edition and Java version. So yung original niyan is yung Java pa rin. So yung Java version nito, yan nga, create using Java programming language pa rin. So kung hindi kasi ni-release yung source code ng Minecraft pero marami pong because of Minecraft, marami pong mga developers ang na-inspire na gumawa ng Minecraft-looking games such as the Roblox, di ba? They actually use the same methods pero different way on how they implement them. So that's Minecraft. Yun. So those are the different games na dinevelop by Java. At least alam na natin kung ano yung mga particular na pwede pala talagang gawin ni Java programming in terms of game development. So in this module, in this part of the course, especially for finals, we will try to write some basics, okay, needed to create some games. We create a basic application, paint a donut, display a picture in which alam na natin kung paano to. And of course, gawa tayo dito ng controllable basic UFO. Okay? So, FYI po, you need to download this one. Teka lang, i-upload ko sa canvas natin ha. You need to download the images files later on because lahat ng mga files or mga sprites na gagamitin natin nandito. So, limbawa, for Pac-Man. May Pac-Man kasi tayong gagawin. Yan, mga sprites lang naman siya. Para hindi na kayo maghanap-hanap ng mga kung ano-ano. So, i-upload ko to. And make sure you download them because, of course, we will be using them dito. Uy, ba't ayaw mag-create ng file? Ayun. Choose file, images. Ayan. Yan, mamaya ina-navigate natin yan ha. Okay. So, let's actually try to start. May mga i-skip tayong part dito kasi medyo baka para umabot tayo sa oras. Dito tayo sa ito. I want you guys to take note that all Java programming, especially for Java 2D, let's make it in the most conventional way. We have to make sure to create first what we call the board panel. Itong board panel, because the board panel is where that game takes place. Okay? So, we have here the application.java program in which a very simple program lang na ipakita ko sa inyo. Ayan. So, if you can see here, let's try to analyze each part of the code. Diba? So, first of all, you have to import the following packages, the event queue, JFrame, and the JPanel. In your main method, we used here the event queue, invoke later, which is, of course, pwede kong ilagay dito sa public void run, pero okay lang yan. Tinanggal ko na lang muna siya. And inside the invoke later method, I instantiated a new object, which is application. The name application here is actually the name of the Java file itself. Take note. So, JFrame yan. Next na natin, we actually inherited all of the components ni JFrame and put that inside the application. Now, in the constructor public application is where we called here the initUI method in which we are doing, diba? Nagmula nung natuto tayo ng Java 2D. Now, the initUI method is where we will try to set the properties of our JFrame. So, we set here the size of the JFrame, which is basically 250 by 200. We set the title. We already know what's the purpose of this one. Yung title dito. And the default close operation, of course, the location relative to. Now, in the initUI method is also where we instantiated a new object. Pero this time, this is a JPanel, which is what we call the new board. Okay, yung new na to, this is how we instantiate a new object in which we created a separate class with a name board. Okay? So, itong sa board na to, we extend or we try to inherit all of the components under the J-panel itself. Nandito yan, sa J-panel. Okay? Now, this is actually where the magic will begin because all of your implementation, all of your mechanics will actually be placed here eventually inside the public board constructor. Hanggang sa kapag may mga action listeners na tayo dito lahat yan sa buong class na to mailalagay. Okay? So that's actually the most basic, the easiest way and the starting point of every Java 2D game development na gagawin natin from now on. Okay? So I want you guys to at least take a screenshot of this one. This is the frame, diba? The framework of our program because if hindi nyo alam gawin itong napaka-basic na framework na to, mahihirapan talaga kayong mag-survive sa mga next activities natin. Okay? So, that's the frame. Now, as you can see here, ayan, nabanggit ko naman na pala itong mga to. So, especially here dito sa may main method natin, it's the instance of the application X. Okay? Now, in the next example here, we will try to draw a donut shape that looks something like this. This actually, this actually looks very, what do you call this one, very complicated. Pero in reality, it's easy to do. Okay? So, sige, gawa tayo dito tanggalin ko muna tong donut example ko dito. And let's actually try to recreate the donut example. Itong part na to. Okay? This time, I added here the different properties. So, if in case na ma-miss out yung part ng discussion na to, you just simply have to, you just have to simply take a look at the following parts of the code para mas maintindihan natin. So, we start by creating a class here. Public class. Diba? Pisa natin yan. Public class. Doughnut. Example. Yan. Extends JFrame. So, we have here the main method as well. Public static void main string args. And take note, let's try to import the following. So, i-copy-paste ko na lang tong part na to. We have event queue, we have the JFrame, we have here the basic stroke, the color, the dimension, graphics 2D, rendering hints, affine transform, ellipse 2D, and the JPanel. So once again, pwede po nating i-shortcut yan kung tinatamad po kayong mag-type ng mga ganyan. So pwede po natin itong gamitin, di ba? Si java.out na lang na diretsong ganyan. Which is also good in terms of how you try to minimize the lines of code. Pero again, for the sake of this class, I just like to, show the different packages that we need to import. So, in the main method here is where we will create the event queue. Yan. The invoke later. Tapos, meron tayong new runnable dito. And we have here the donut example. We'll name that as X. So, by now, based from the discussion natin ng pagkahaba-haba sa module number 4, kung napanood nyo man isa-isa yung video ko, paulit-ulit yung process natin on how we start. Diba? So after the new runnable here, we have the public Doughnut example, which serves as the constructor of our program and will eventually call what we call the init UI method. So let's try to set the properties of our init UI. Private void init UI. Oops. Ayan. So let's try to instantiate a new JPanel here, which is the board. Basically, this is the board. Okay, yung ginawa natin kanina. Pinaltang ko lang, nilagyan ko lang ng board underscore donut. Set size, 330 by 330. This is a good opportunity for us to practice na rin and sabayan akong mag-type. Kasi ganyan po sa programming, dapat mabilis kayong mag-type ng mga codes ninyo. And nakakatulong po if ever na you have your mechanical keyboards. I think it's really necessary for IT people to, invest on mechanical keyboards. But just be very careful because it's addictive. Nakaka-addict pong ang magkaroon ng bisyo ng mechanical keyboards. Just for my opinion. Ayan. Pero yeah, it is really necessary for coding kasi yun nga, mas maganda yung feel and mas in fairness, nakaka-improve talaga ng typing speed, especially in programming. Okay, so we instantiated here the object board donut. So let's go ahead and create that. We have class board underscore donut extends jpanel. Ayan. Tapos, since we extended the jpanel here, okay, override muna natin si public void paint component in which we are doing capital G graphics, small g, and let's use the super paint component G. Tapos, we have here the draw donut na tatawagin natin. Okay, ito kung natatandaan nyo, ito yung do drawing natin before. Pinaltan ko lang ng pangalan. Kasi, para mas madali nating maintindihan yung code natin later on. So, we actually tried to put the graphics components inside this method, in which this method here, the private void draw donut graphics G, is basically where we will simply cast the graphics component into graphics 2D. So kahit na G lang muna yan, okay lang din kung may G.create yan. Now, para mas maayos yung pagkaka-render natin, we will use rendering hints. Let's name that as RH. New rendering hints. By now, you should already know the purpose of this one. Key anti-aliasing. Rendering hints. Key anti-aliasing. Tapos rendering hints dot value underscore anti-alias underscore on. Ayan. Tapos, we also have here another rendering hint in which we will simply put the properties na ginawa natin dito kanina inside this method. Yan. Rendering hints, .key rendering. Pinakita ko rin kung ano ang difference kung meron itong rendering quality nito sa wala. Diba? So, mapapansin nyo, medyo jagged yung lines kapag wala ito in reality. Diba? Well, at least pag merong ito, rendering hints, mas okay siya. Mas magiging malinaw. So, let's set the rendering hints, yan, into RH. Now, for the dimension, we will set a dimension here, and I'll call that as size. Ang purpose nito, let's go back to the module here. The purpose of that particular method here is simply to get the width and the height of the entire window. Yan. We need them to center the donut shape on the window. So basically, what we are trying to do here is whatever the size of your J-frame, yan, kukunin natin yan. Yung eksaktong size niya. And alam naman natin ang size si J-frame, di ba? So, ibig sabihin, every time na nire-resize nyo yung J-frame on your own, nagpapalit din yung value nito. So, height, get that height. So, for now, alam natin na ang value niyan is 330 by 330. Pero paano pag binago mo yung size ng J-frame, di ba? So, yun yung importance ng code na to. Now, this part of the code here, the Ellipse 2D, this is the way on how we create the ellipse itself. Okay, dito. Ellipse. Ellipse 2D. E. I'll name that as E. And this is ellipse 2D that double 0, 0, 80, and 130. Ayan. So, tignan natin yan mamaya kung ano ang itsura niyan. So, let's try to set the stroke. And in which ang size lang ng stroke natin is 1. Very, very thin. Tapos yung color natin is simply gray. Ayan. Color that gray. So, let's run that. Tingnan natin kung may output na to. Now, for now, syempre, wala pang magpapakitang output dyan. Kasi nga, hindi pa kompleto yung code natin. So, it's actually time for us to at least complete the code. Ito kasing part na to, this is simply the properties of your ellipse. Pero, this part of the code here, itong part na to, we will be using the affine transform in which we will try to rotate the entire ellipse 72 times to create a donut shape. 72 times natin siyang i-create. Okay? So, meron na tayong idea kung ilang beses based on the examples that we have here. So, by simply using what we call the for loop, of course, we will set the degree first as 0. Tapos, for as long as the degree is less than 360 or hindi pa siya nag-revolve ng paulit-ulit, we will try to redraw the entire circle 2D or the ellipse 2D every 5 degrees. So, you have here circle, gumaganyan-ganyan na siya ng 5 degrees. So, once na na-reach niya yung 360 degrees, we will now be using the affine transform here, yan, in which we will simply translate, get translate instance, the width, and the height of the entire circle. So, ilalagay lang natin yung circle dito sa gitna, panibago. And, we will rotate them based on based on the value of the degree dito. So, we will try to rotate that into the value of the degree. So, since the increment here is 5, of course, the initial value of degree is 0. So, since we rotated that, 0 degrees, wala pa nangyari. Once we rotated that in 5, yan, nag-rotate na siya in 5, gumanyan na siya. Diba? So, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, and so on. So, bakit nga ba 360? Because it's entire revolution. And if you divide 360 by 5, you will get 72. So, meaning 72 times natin siyang i-rotate. Ganun po yun. Okay? Now, the last part of the code here is where we will now try to draw the affine transform here. And it's important to create the transform shape individually. Yan. Create natin siya individually. Itong ellipse 2D ito, di ba? So, dito ngayon papasok yon yung draw na ito. So, based on the initial value of ellipse here, ellipse 2D, that will now be placed inside the draw method. So, if you try to run that, ganun na po siya. 72 times yan. So, kung napansin natin, paikot-ikot yan ng paikot-ikot. Okay? So, that's actually how you basically create a very simple Java program. And you notice that every time na nire-resize ko yung JFrame natin, pumupunta rin sa gitna yung donut shape natin. That's actually the power of itong dimension na to, because we would like to set them in the center most of the time. Okay? So, that's donut example. Yan. So, ano lang yan, practice lang yan para at least alam ninyo kung paano gamitin ang mga shapes natin. Now, since we are creating here, what we are trying to do is somehow related to game development. It's also important for you guys to know and master how to import or put some images dito. Now, in your module number 4, nagpakita ko ng napakadaming example kung paano maglagay ng image, di ba? So, basically, hindi ko na i-code to, pero uulitin din natin yung explanation para at least mas maintindihan natin. But before that, I want you to at least take a screenshot on this one and do it on your own. So, screenshot. And this one. Okay. So, for the image example here, alam naman na siguro natin kung paano maglagay ng or maghanap ng source, 'di ba? So, everyone, I want you guys to navigate the path where your IntelliJ projects are stored. So, we have here, in my case, that's the path. So, idea projects. Ayan. Tapos, anong pangalan nito? Java 2D game programming na project. Now, inside the source, here, inside sa source na to, make sure to copy and paste all, okay? Copy and paste all of your images. Yung in-upload ko sa Canvas ngayon lang, paki-copy and paste po siya dito sa loob nito. So, makikita nyo na ngayon sa IntelliJ or NetBeans na may mga folder na rin kayo nakagaya ng ganyan. Kasi gagamitin na natin yan sa mga next example natin from now on. Okay? And, of course, ito, si Marine. Ayan. Okay. So, we should already know how to do this. Pero ipakita ko lang ulit sa inyo kung paano. Para at least magkaroon tayo ng idea. Now, of course, the main method simply instantiates the image example class in which the name of our entire class. Image example here called the initUI method, in which the initUI method is where we try to set the properties of our JFrame. So in the initUI method, we instantiated a new JPanel, the board image, set the title, set the default close operation, and the relative close to. Now, in the board image, we extended this one yan, via JPanel since nilagay natin siya sa loob ni JFrame. Diba? And I actually created here or declared here a variable in which I named that as Marine pero under the image class na ginamit natin dito. So inside the constructor board underscore image is where we called the init board. Ang purpose na itong init board is number 1, to load the image. Load image is where you will now be calling the path, the exact path of your image. So in my case, it's src underscore marine. Yan. Nandyan siya. No need for you to put the entire path na yung saktong ganito. Nakikita nyo dito, no need. Kasi automatic, alam na ni Java yan. Kung nasan lang siyang folder, yun yung ilalagay nyo. And using the II variable here, we will now be placing this image inside the marine na, marine na variable, and I will get the image itself. So, meaning, this marine variable here contains an image based from the path or the source that we actually have placed. So, in this part of the program, this is actually where we will now be setting the preferred size of our image. Pero, the size of the image or the size of course, the image will now be dependent on its particular resolution. Kaya nga get width and get height, diba? And if you notice, hindi tayo dito nag-set ng JFrame size because I want the JFrame size to be the size of the image itself. Take note. Kaya yun yung purpose ng get width and get height natin. So if I set the preferred size of our JFrame, this supposedly looks something like that, diba? Pero since we extended that, okay na. We set the preferred size into the size of the image itself. As simple as that. Now, inside the paint component, hindi na tayo dito nagbato ng graphics 2D or nagcast pa ng graphics 2D, but then we simply draw. Okay, we simply just draw the image with a variable marine with the following properties, and starting location is 0 is 0. Ganun po siya. So kapag i-run naman natin ito, ayan, pagka i-run naman natin siya, magiging ganyan na siya. So very easy. But then, the size of the JFrame will not actually, or the size of the image will not change because it is only relative to the size of the image itself. So depende kung anong image ang ilalagay nyo dito, yun din yung magiging size si JFrame mo. Got it? So that's actually the image example. That's the very basic way on how we put an image in our Java 2D program later on. Now, let's move on and talk about animation. Ito yung lagi kong sinasabi kasi by having a knowledge of animation and at the same time programming, you can do a lot of things. And in reality po, especially in the industry, hindi lang po enough na magaling ka sa programming or may idea ka kung paano mag-program. Hindi rin enough na marunong ka lang sa animation. It's better to have both, I'm telling you, because the chances of you getting, promoted will be very high. So it's really important for us to at least know the basics of animation and programming at the same time. Hindi kasi porke yung feeling mo magaling ka na sa animation, doon ka na lang. No, you still need to learn programming. Uh, Adobe After Effects, if you know that, di ba? Uses JavaScript to animate, di ba? I don't know if you're aware of that, pero it still have a programming. And napakadami pong software ngayon na gumagamit na rin ng mga programming language to animate stuff. So, in Java, ganun din po, we have here what we call animation. And when we say animation kasi, it's a rapid display of sequence of images which simply creates an illusion of movement. And we already know that. We will animate a star on our board, in which I'll show you later on, and we will try to implement the same program 3 different times. Okay? We will use swing timer, standard utility timer, and what we call threads. And animation is a complex subject, especially in game programming. The Java games are expected to run on multiple operating systems with different hardware specifications. Threads give the most accurate timing solutions. Take note ha, threads give the most accurate timing solutions. However, for our simple 2D games, other 2 options can be an option 2. Papakita ko yan. Ano nga ba itong gagawin natin dito? We have here what we call the swing timer. What we are trying to do here is to simply produce an output that looks something like this. Ganyan. Okay? And in this particular program, we will be using what we call the swing timer muna. Yung itong timer. Javax.swing timer. So, ulitin natin tong code natin para mas maintindihan natin. Okay? So, again, we will try to implement that 3 times. But then, according to of course, the conventional way, threads is the most effective. But then the 2 different way on how you implement that can be used too. Kasi nga, Java 2D lang naman tayo. And I want you to prepare the star.png na picture here because that will be used later on. So, para hindi na tayo mahirapan, java.out, ganyan na lang, and javax.swing. Okay? But then, our focus here will actually be the javax.swing, the timer. Yun yung magiging focus natin dito. Okay? Pero wag natin import yan. Nandito na yan eh. Yan. So, public class, swing timer, x, extends, jframe. Okay? Alam na natin yan. And we have here public static void main string args event queue dot invoke later new runnable or kahit na wala na yung new runnable pala, turuan ko kayo ng bago. Invoke later, ganyan lang. Tapos you can just simply use dash and ano ba to? Greater than operation. So ganyan siya. Tapos, pa ganyan. So, it looks the new runnable, but then it's the shortcut version of the new runnable, by the way. So, wala nga lang public void run. Kasi diretso ka agad sa pag-instantiate ng new object dito. So, new swing timer x that set visible true. Ayan. Okay? So, it's the same with the new runnable. It doesn't actually, kung gusto niyo na paiksin yung code natin, ganyan lang po talaga siya. So, let's create here the constructor. Public swing timer x and call the initUI method in which the private void initUI is where we'll be instantiating another class. I'll name that as board underscore swing timer. Yan. So, tatawagin natin yan as a JPanel. Tapos, the resizable should be false. So, meaning, hindi na natin siya pwedeng ma-resize. We will try to pack the entire JFrame or any components that we have as one. Tapos, we set the title as star. We set the location relative to null. And we set the default close operation into exit and close. Ganun po siya. Now, let's create here the class board underscore swing timer. And let's extend jPanel para dito. Now, since we have here a moving star na pababa, isang direction lang naman yung gagamitin natin, it's important for us to implement, okay? Implement here, action listener. Gumagalaw yun eh. So, swing timer ang gagamitin, hindi pa mostly thread. So, action listener muna tayo. So, once na umandar na yung program, automatic, babasahin niya agad si override, public void, action performed, action event, E. So, dyan siya pupunta. Okay? Tapos, lagay natin dito si repaint ng entire agad para mas madali. Now, it's may error pa rin. I think dahil hindi natin nilagay itong dalawang to. Ayan. So, lagay natin siya as a separate package dito. Okay? So, we have created the action perform method. It's now time for us to create the public void, paint component, graphics G. Tapos, yun nga, ginagawa na natin ito pa ulit-ulit. Paint component G, draw star. I'll call here the draw star. This is the do drawing. Take note. Pero this time, tatawagin ko si draw star. Si draw star dito, okay, this is actually where we will now be placing all of the components ni star natin. So we have private void draw star, graphics G, then that's it for now. Next is for us to declare the following variables. Number one is actually the size or the width and the height of our JFrame, or JPanel. I'll name that as width equals 350. Tapos ito height na to. Kasi hindi tayo nag-set dito ng 'di ba? So this time mag-set tayo dito. Let's also put here an initial position of our x value. So gusto natin na yung x value natin is hindi magi-start doon sa 0 position, but rather medyo malayo ng konti, -40. So same goes through with initial y, initial underscore y, we will set that as -40. Now, for the delay, which is very important, set natin siya as 25 milliseconds only. So, ang pag-under niyan, pag ganun lang. Okay? Uy, lumiwanag. Okay. Next is for us to redeclare the image in which gagamitin natin yung star dito. I'll also call the timer class. I'll name that as timer and set a variable for them kung saan siya pupunta. Ganun siya. Okay. So, it's time for us now to simply create the constructor board underscore swing timer. Okay. Tatawagin natin dito si what we call init board, in which will simply, ang purpose ni init board will simply call the image, tapos doon natin ilalagay yung image natin mismo. Okay. So, init board here, private void init board. Ayan. I'll set the background into color that black for now. I'll set the preferred size, which is kung ano yung initial size natin kanina, which is b underscore width and b underscore height. Okay? Now, dito natin ngayon tatawagin tong panibago nating method na load image. And the position of the image itself, kung saan siya manggagaling. And of course, yan yung initial position niya. I will also instantiate here the timer object, in which tatawagin ko si timer and will simply put a delay of 25 milliseconds. And eventually, that will start later on. So, lagay na natin si image dito. For the image itself, the easiest way, Yan. Load image. So, we should know by now na kung gusto nyo gumawa ng image or maglagay ng image, you should do this. src, ano to? src star.png. So, star.png. Yan. Lagay natin yan sa loob ng star and get image itself. Okay, so we have the image. You have the properties of your entire board, okay, which is basically the J-frame and the J-panel. It's inside that. So, i-work on na natin ngayon dito si action performed. Okay? Si action performed and at the same time, si draw star. Kasi si draw star dito natin ilalagay si image natin. Tatawagin natin yan. So, we have the star, we have the initial value, and reference to itself. Ganun po siya. Now, we also have to call what we call the toolkit, that get default toolkit, para mag-sync in real time yung paggalaw ng star mo later on. Now, paano gagalaw ang star natin? The movement of the star will now be performed inside this method, action performed method. We would like to at least make sure that the star is moving 1 pixel every now and then. Oops, minus. This should not mind. Ayan. Now, for as long as the position of the star of y is actually greater than the height position of your J-frame, what will happen? The initial value of, the y value now will get the value of y, and kumbaga ang ginagawa nito, pag lumagpas na, pag nandito na siya sa ilalim, babalik doon. Magiging initial y ulit siya. Kukunin niya ulit yung value nito. Nagsha-change yan. Paulit-ulit yan na gumaganyan, tapos gumaganyan. So if you will try to run this program, dito nangyayari yan sa action performed method. Lahat ng yan. So, kung napansin nyo, hindi siya totally nag-start dito sa 0, 0 position, but rather, it started somewhere dito sa may taas. Ayan. Diba? And once it reached this particular height here, ito, nandito, it will now start. The y and x value will now be restarted into its position. Ganun siya. So, mamaya, pagka gusto nyo lang kasi na X lang ang gumagalaw, gumaganyan lang, syempre X lang yung gagalawin nyo dito. Diba? X lang ang gagalawin dyan. Kung gusto nyo pababa lang, syempre ang gagamitin ninyo is si Y lang. So, you can just simply try to play around with this one. And that's using what we call the timer. Ang timer natin is 25 milliseconds. Try natin siyang palakihin into 1,000. Let's see what will happen. Yung delay natin ng timer. Now, if we adjusted the delay of the timer here up to like 1,000, of course, sobrang tagal bago magpakita. Kasi every 1,000 ang galaw nung star mo. Gumaganyan siya. Every 1 second. Ayun, kung napapansin nyo, ngayon pa lang siya lumalabas. Diba? So, kung gusto nyo ng mas mabilis, adjust the delay. The lower the delay, the faster it gets. Ayun. So, kung gusto nyo pa ng mas mabilis, every 1 millisecond, pukpuk, gumaganan siya ng mas mabilis. Ayun. Okay, so that's actually using what we call the swing timer. Ang swing timer kasi yan, just simply read this part para at least mas may ma-review kayo ulit para maintindihan nyo yung tong part na to ulit. Now, yung swing timer kasi nag-focus lang tayo sa may swing. Ito, the utility timer, it's actually similar to the swing timer itself, pero this time meron tayong tinatawag na java.util. Itong utility na to. Okay? For Java Swing games, this way is more accurate. Although the implementation is different, in which I will show you. Okay? Ito yun, no? Timer task. So, kung titignan natin maigi si main method natin dito, we have the main method, the same main method, the same class utility timer. Yan. Init UI, we didn't set the size of the J-frame. And in the new class, we have here extends JPanel, but then we didn't really use or implement action listener. This time, utility timer na ang gagamitin natin. So, I declare the following variables: the initial width and height of your JFrame, the initial position of your star, and I added here an initial delay which is 100 milliseconds, and the period interval is every 25 milliseconds as well. So kapag umaandar yan, pag ganyan-ganyan siya, mabilis. Hindi siya makitang gumaganyan pero pa-straight ng ganyan. So just like earlier, we declared private image star in which we load that dito. Tapos yung X and Y position natin. Dito lang siya mag-iiba yung pagkaka-implement natin dito sa init board. Yung init board natin, tinawag natin si init board sa loob ng mismong constructor natin. Okay? So we set the background color, we set the preferred size, we load the image in which called the path of your source. Yan. We set the initial position of the star. We now call the timer. And this time, yan, gagamit tayo ng tinatawag dito na schedule at fixed rate. Ang schedule at fixed rate kasi have the following parameters: initial delay and period interval. Siya po yung kailangan natin gamitin para identify yung movement ng ating star from top to bottom. Now, inside the draw star, ito, doon natin i-draw yung star natin. Basically, yung ganina lang. And we have the toolkit, that get default toolkit. Yan. So, private class is schedule task. This is another task na gagamitin natin because we use what we called here the timer task. So, parang yung implements kanina, ito lang yung pumalit dun sa implements kanina, kung napansin nyo. Diba? I think it's really the same process, different implementation lang. Because earlier we have implements action listener in which inside the action perform, simply do the movement thing. Diba? Ganon din dito. Pero this time, naiba lang yung class niya, schedule task lang ang pangalan niya, extends timer task. Yun nga, they are very similar, swing and utility timer. So it's actually all up to you kung ano yung gagamitin niyo dito later on. Would you like to implement an action listener? Or would you like to, instead of action listener, implement a utilities timer already? So, depende yan kung ano yung magiging purpose nyo. But then, the thread is actually the most effective. The threads. Ito yung, personally, this is my favorite part of every Java program because threading, it produces the most accurate way of animation. Unlike kanina kasi, naka-depende lang ito sa interval and initial delay. Kapag threads, in which I will explain and I will recode the entire ano dito, wag lang natin itong explain ko na lang din. Yan. Ang threads kasi mas sakto. Okay? Mas magiging sakto yung movements nito. Well, in fact, the way on how we implement threads is actually way different. Take note, dito tayo sa may packages natin. So we have image and we have the toolkit. We have the image icon, the option pane. So parang pareho lang, di ba? Pero dito, sa main method, we already know how to do this. And the init UI and the board underscore thread. Now, inside the board underscore thread here, ito, we call the init board in which set the size of your JFrame na dineclare natin dito as variable b underscore width and b underscore height. Diba? So, 350 yung set niya dito. The initial position of your star will also be yan, initial underscore x, which is -40, -40. But then, pagdating natin dito sa may constructor natin or let's say, ito, paint component, diba? We draw the star, we draw the image, and this time, you have what we call the public void run. Itong public void run na to. Although this is much longer comparing to what we have done in the swing. However, this will produce a much accurate solution. So before that, para ka lang ding nag-implement dito ng action listener, Di ba? So by simply adding what we call the override annotation on top of the add notify. The add notify here just simply tell the Java program that you will now try to use threads. Ito, instantiation of threads in your Java program. So the animator here, ito yun, private thread animator. Ibig sabihin, pagka-run pa lang ni program mo, magi-start na agad yung movement. Okay? So wala ka ng delay, wala ka ng particular na iba pa pupuntahan, didiretso ka agad dito sa animator that start na to. Now, since we are using the threads here, you instantiated the new runnable thread here in which named animator. It's really necessary for us to create here what we call the public void run. Thread yan eh. Kung napansin nyo, ang public void run, nandito yan sa dito. Diba? New runnable na to. It can happen inside the main method, but then it's not conventional. Although, it's possible. Kaya nga tinanggal ko muna dito yung public void run. Kasi si public void run ngayon dito will now simply, take a look, declare the following variable, before time, the time differential, and the sleep, kung ilang seconds siya magtitigil. So the before time will simply get the current time in milliseconds of your entire system itself. So kung ano yung system time mo, titignan niya. And for as long as umaandar yan, it will go to the cycle in which will simply move the star from paganyan, yan, repaint that, and will now identify the time differential between the current time. So for example, ang current time natin dito in milliseconds is 100. So 100 minus the before time, in which the before time is for example 90. So the time differential now is actually 10. So, yun yung magiging value ngayon ni time differential. 10 milliseconds na yung interval ng mangyayari. But then, since we have provided here a sleep, yan, tong may delay na to, si delay, ano yung value ni delay natin dito? 25 milliseconds. Yan. Titignan lang nito kung kailan titigil yung program. Kaya nga may sleep tayo. For as long as the sleep is greater than 0, the sleep will always have a value of 2. And a very simple try-catch method. Ano lang to? Wala lang to. Kahit hindi nyo na to puntahan. Actually, kahit nga wala tong part na to eh. Hindi naman talaga siya necessary. To be honest. Hanggang dito lang yan. To be honest with you. Nilagay ko lang to para makita ninyo na pag naglagay kayo ng delay and nag-set kayo ng specific delay, you can actually check the message. Yan. And pwede kayong bumalik ulit sa pinaka current time in milliseconds mo. So, I know this is much longer as to compare to swing and utility timer. But then, this is, I think, the most conventional way para mag-animate tayo in Java. Later on, sa mga magiging next part ng programming lessons natin, halimbawa, pag snake na, gagawa kasi tayo i-recreate natin si Snake, si Pac-Man, si Tetris, si Space Invaders, yung mga basic na game ng araw, i-recreate natin yan. Kung kaya nga ng oras, even Flappy Bird can be done using Java program. Just a very basic Java program. Try natin yan. Try natin gawin si Flappy Bird kung may oras tayo one of these days. Madali yan. Threads ang gagamitin natin most of the time. Ito. I know this is a new, a foreign topic once again, but then just chill. Hindi yan mahirap. Mukha lang mahirap yan kasi hindi nyo pa natatry on your own. Although the implementation is somehow confusing, that's really the purpose of, checking our favorite websites such as, the programming tutorials out there in Java. So, meron tayo ditong mga tutorials point. Meron tayong basta napakadami. Especially for threads. Yan. Kakampi nyo dito ang mga ganito. Pero, huwag kayong mag-alala, hindi naman natin pahirapan ng totally ang threading natin. Kasi, example-based lahat tayo. Kailangan nyo lang din siyang sundan ulit and gawin. Okay? So, that's threading. I want you to at least review the following annotations here and the following parts of the program para hindi kayo malito. Now, we can now simply move on kasi alam na natin mag-animate, alam na natin maglagay ng image, 'di ba? This time, we will try to move a specific sprite. Ang sprite kasi, it has like multiple definition. Meron yung mga sprite na per yan, yung sprite na bote. Pero meron din yung mga sprite animation sheet kagaya nitong mga walking na to. 'Di ba? Pwede yan. Even the jumping. I don't know kung nakatry na kayong gumawa ng mga ganito. Pero in Java programming kasi, for now, gagamit lang tayo ng sprite na napaka-basic. Okay? So, we will only use a single frame kasi hindi pa naman totally gumagalaw yung, wala pa namang animation eh. Unlike dito, may animation kasi ito. Asan yun? May animation na to eh. So, saka natin gagawin tong mga ganito. Kapag kasi Pacman gumaganyan na. Okay? So, napakadaming sprite. So, I don't know kung pinagawa kayo ni Sir Clemente ng ganito. Mga sprite sheets. I ain't sure. Pero ako kasi, pinagawa ko yung mga students ko dati ng animation nito for game development. Yan. So, gagamit tayo ng sprites, pero a single frame sprite only. What we are trying to do here is for us to recreate this program na ginawa ko rin, in which ang purpose na itong first program natin is, saan yan? We will try to move the spaceship. Okay? A very basic very small spaceship. Gagamit tayo dito ng mga keyboard press such as up, down, left, right arrow. Hindi ko pa in-implement si WASD kasi sa inyo yun. Kayo mag-i-implement ang WASD. Ayan. So that's the first. Yung second example naman natin dito is where we will now be using what we call the space bar to add some missiles. Ayan. So may missiles na tayo. For the next week, ang pinakagagawin natin dito is we will now add an enemy for us to shoot. So for now, hanggang dito muna tayo for the last two programs. So let's try to focus ourselves muna dito sa may moving sprites X class natin. Okay? So burahin ko to. Gawa tayo ng panibago. And I want you to prepare craft.png dito sa may natin, sa may image folder na meron tayo. Craft.png. Okay, so yun yung gagamitin natin eh. Kasi ito, napakaliit na ito eh. Platypus game. Yan. So, ganyan lang siya. Napaka-basic lang. Pwede nyo po itong paltan kung gusto nyo. Try to recreate or look for some aircraft sa internet. Then try to change just simply the J-frame or the game window ng iyong program para mas maano natin. Okay. So, tignan muna natin kung ano yung mga need nating i-import. So, event queue, that's given. The J-frame, that's also given. Another thing here is the color, the graphics, outlet graphics, tapos import ulit tayo dito ng java.outletgraphics 2D. We also have to import the toolkit. Yan. Tapos out.event.action listener. Tapos action event. Oops. And action event. Dami, no? Again, kung tinatamad kayong gawin to, yung tektik lang na tinuro ko, okay na yun. Java.out.event key adapter, key event, in which may keyboard press na kasi tayo eh. So, key adapter. Yan. Tapos, yung dalawang natin, ano nga ba yung dalawa? Javax.swing, .jpanel, and the timer. Okay. Yung timer muna tayo. Tapos, si image. Import java.out.image and si image icon. Oh, hindi pala java.out yan. Hindi pala Java dito. Java.swing. Ayan. So let's create here the public class moving sprite x extends jframe. Okay. And the public static void main string args natin. So, prepare na natin yan. Baka ano yan, di ba? Yung gawin na lang muna natin to. Event queue dot invoke later. Tapos, we have here the new runnable, pero gawin lang natin pa ganyan. Oops. Tapos, moving sprites x, new moving sprite x. I'll set the visibility into true. And the constructor, public moving sprite x constructor init UI. Tapos, private void init UI. Boom, panis. Tapos, new board sprite. I'll call that as a JFrame. And let's set the title. Moving sprite. Ano lang to ha? Aircraft na may arrow keys lang. For now. Okay? For now. Yung next program natin ang meron ng missiles. 400 by 300. Location relative to null. The resizable to false. Ayaw natin siyang galawin. And the default close operation as exit and close. So, framework natin, okay na, no? So, gawin naman natin si mismong spaceship natin. Or si board sprite natin na tinatawag. Okay. In the board sprite, we already know what we should do here. Class board underscore sprite. Yan. We will extend jpanel and implement action listener. For now, ano muna tayo? Swing timer muna tayo. Mas mahaba i-implement ang ang threads pagdating dito. Yan. Action listener. So we have two override annotation. Ano yung una? The public void either action performed, action event E, and the override annotation for public void paint component graphics G. Okay. So dito sa paint component natin, tatawagin natin si super paint component G, then simply call the do drawing once again. Tapos, gamitin na rin natin si toolkit. Ano lang, yung default toolkit lang niya. Parang mag-sync lang yung nangyayari sa mismong event natin. Yan. So, inside the do drawing, we have here private void do drawing. This is where we will be casting the graphics G. Nakikita nyo naman, no? Sabihin nyo lang kung medyo malabo para i-zoom in ko pa. So, do drawing. We have graphics G2D. Yan. Graphics G2D equals graphics 2D G. Tapos, may gagawin tayo dito. This is where we draw image, the spaceship with their positions. Mamaya natin gagawin yan. Okay? So, may kulang pa tayo dito eh. Okay na si action perform, meron na si paint component, meron na si do drawing. We are lacking the constructor sprite. Yan. For the constructor, set natin si board natin. Again, board is where all of the happenings in your game will take place. So, init board. Now, in the init board kasi, tatawagin natin si key listener natin sa keyboard. Take note, sa keyboard. So, gagawa ako dito ng panibagong class And I'll name that as T-adapter. Okay? Panibagong class yan na tatawagin ko ha. Tapos, I'll set the background color as true. I mean, color that true. Color that black pala. Tapos, I will set focusable ni JFrame as true. Yan. So, meron tayo ditong create ha, na panibago. T-adapter. So, this is also important because we will be using timer. We will be using a class spaceship underscore first. I'll name that as underscore first. Tapos, I'll name this as spaceship. Okay. Explain ko yan mamaya kung anong purpose yan. Spaceship. This is how object-oriented programming works. And in game development po, gantong-ganto to. Talagang pa ikot-ikot kayo. Now, I called here a foreign class which is spaceship underscore first. Ang purpose nito is inside the init board, dito natin kasi ilalagay yung properties the spaceship. So, diyan natin siya i-instantiate. Okay? So, diyan natin siya i-instantiate. Kung napansin nyo, red pa yan kasi hindi pa natin siya totally ginagawa. So, meron tayong two classes na ginawa. This is for the spaceship and this is for the keyboard presses na gagamitin natin. Now, we will set the timer. This is important as an initial delay. Yan. Tapos, timer that start na paganyan muna. Okay? Now, dito sa may gusto kasi natin mangyari bago natin i-work ang lahat. Si action perform muna tayo dito. Si action perform may tatawagin na method na step in which si step ngayon, okay, itong si step ngayon, basically siya yung magpapa-move ng spaceship mo. Take note ha, siya yung magpapa-move ng spaceship mo. Itong si spaceship na to, we simply instantiated a new object on that one. Hindi pa natin ito win-workout eh. So, mamaya natin workout ng konti yan. So, tatawagin natin si move, meaning gagalawin natin si X value neto later on. So, every time na nag-move si spaceship, we will also try to get the value of X. Okay? The value of X minus 1. Hindi, mamaya na lang pala to. Ganyan na lang muna. Okay? So, ganyan muna tayo. Para mas paunti-unti lang, pa isa-isa lang muna tayo. Para mas maintindihan natin siya. Okay. So, meron na tayo ditong the adapter spaceship first. Now, let's try to create here the class spaceship underscore first. Gagawin na natin. So, para mawala lang tong error na to, tong spaceship class na to, dito sa pinakataas ulit, let's create spaceship underscore first. So, again, the name here should be the same nito. Pansin nyo, nawala na yung red niya, no? Nung create ko, yan, no? Nawala na yung red. Ayun. So, okay na siya. Ibig sabihin, this is an entirely new object and we will try to implement the following, especially its properties. So, meron tayo ditong need na i-declare na position ng X, position ni Y, initial position ni X, which is 40, initial position ni Y, which is 60, tapos, the size, and the image itself. Ayan. So, please, kailangan nyo itong masundan ha, kasi magpapakita to sa mga activities ninyo. Yan. So, we have private image. We didn't actually try to implement or inherit some particular stuff. So, we have here public, the constructor, spaceship, underscore first. And we will call load image. Ayan. So, dito na natin ilalagay si load image. Si private void load image naman natin ngayon. Dito natin tatawagin si image icon src craft.png. Tama ba yung spelling ko? Craft.png. Okay. Craft.png. I'll set the image. Yan. So, kunin natin. Tapos, yung X value yung width ni image natin, which is very small. Diba? And the height. Tapos, iset natin to as null. For now. Yan. That's the observer. Okay. So, take note. Okay na tong si spaceship natin. Nagawa na natin yung image natin. Ang next na gagawin natin dito is actually to put the image in our J-frame. The initial position of our image in the J-frame. Now, in order for us to do that, dito tayo ngayon papasok sa may do drawing natin. Dito ba? This is where we put the spaceship with their position. Dito. Pero para magawa natin yan, pakita ko sa inyo na we will draw the image here. Yan. Spaceship, capital N. Yan. Spaceship.get image. Pero kung napansin nyo, wala pa si get image. Diba? So, mamaya i-work out natin kung ano yung mga yan. Kaya babalik tayo muna dito sa spaceship natin. Kasi kulang pa Load image pa lang yung ginagawa natin talaga. Hindi pa totally get image. Okay? So, mapapansin nyo rin dito sa step natin. This is where we move the spaceship. So, pag i-move kasi natin si spaceship, it's really important for us to take note na we have to create here a public void move na ang purpose lang talaga niyan is nag-i-increment. Okay? Nag-i-increment si X and Y value. Yan. Not really here, but instead dito pala. Yan. So, nag-i-increment lang siya. Nag-move siya. Take note. Okay? We will now get the position. Public int get X. We will return the position of X. Properties lang ito itong sineset ko. Properties lang. Get Y. Yan. Return Y. Ito. Public int get width. Get width. Ano yung variable natin for width? W. Okay. W. Return W. We also have here get height. Return H. And lastly, we have here public image. Get image. So, dito natin kukunin yun. Kung pansin nyo kanina, di ba, error pa to? Kasi nga wala pang get image. Si get image naman, we will simply return the whatever value of the image that we have placed here in the load image method. Yan, return image. So, pwede na natin siya ditong ilagay sa sa do drawing. Diba? Ang haba ng process, no? Ganyan po talaga ang start. Take note, pinapagalaw lang natin si spaceship ng up, down, left, right. Diba? So, we will try to draw the image. Spaceship.get image. Tapos yung position ni spaceship, which is get X. Tapos yung position ni spaceship in terms of the Y value. Tama ba? Yan. Y value. And lastly, this. Ganun siya. So, we try to draw the position or the spaceship itself. Anong ibig sabihin na get X ba dito at ni get Y? Ang purpose netong si get X and get Y is the position of the spaceship which is initially set to 40 and 60. So, ibig sabihin kung 40, 60 yan, somewhere nandito sa may upper left corner pa rin ng screen natin. Okay? So, okay na itong mga properties na to. Medyo may magiging kulang pa tayo dito because this is actually where we will now be putting what we called the key events natin. Yung mga key events natin, dito talaga totally mangyayari. Mamaya ako nagagalawin yung T adapter natin kasi that's only for, for listeners. Saka na natin gagalawin yan. So for the key events, I want you guys to at least take note on the following. For the key event, dito tayo. Oops. We have two different key events here. If you pressed, and if you pressed, and if you release, you pressed. Key release. Tandaan nyo yan, dalawang klase po yan pagdating sa Java. In Unity, ganyan din, may mga ganyan din. Key event natin. So pagka pumindot tayo, ano yung mangyayari? We would like to set the spaceship na kapag ka pumindot tayo ng upper arrow, tataas siya. So, ibig sabihin, ano ang tataas dyan? Yung X or Y values. Y. Diba? Kung up yan, ibig sabihin, kung nandito yung spaceship mo and tataas ng paganyan, hindi ka mag-i-increment but then magdi-decrement ka, magma-minus ka ng value. Pataas pag ganyan Pero pag bababa, yung value mo ng Y is mag-i-increment. So, if I press up, I will try to decrement the value of Y. If I press down, I will try to increment the value of the spaceship itself. Kasi nga pababa, di ba? So kung pababa, umaabante rin yung position ng Y mo. Kapag ka right naman, pagpapunta dito sa right mo, of course, nag-i-increment yung value ni X. Pag pa left naman, nagdi-decrement yung value ni Y. So, how is that even possible in Java? We have what we called here in key, in which diyan ko ilalagay lahat ng magiging key codes ko. Okay? Dito na po. So, makinig kayo dito sa part na to kasi ito yung importante. Lalo kapag gusto nyo mag-set ng key press. If press mo dito is VK underscore left. Sabihin left arrow. And take note, ang key events po, madami po. Ayan may mga number ka na pwedeng gamitin. DL, R, US, napakadaming pwede mong gamitin. Even numbers, pwede mong gamitin. Ayan may mga kung wasad, halimbawa, pwede. Diba? Pero in this case, left muna tayo. So if I press left, what will happen? Pag press ako ng left, yung value ni DX will now be -2. Mababawasan siya ng dalawa. Pag isa lang, medyo maliit kasi. So, dalawa ang natin. Let's use 2. Next. If we pressed here VK underscore right, for example, right key natin. Right. So, papunta dito. Ibig sabihin, magpa-plus yung position niya. Positive pa rin. If we press here up, key event.vk underscore up, for example, what will happen kapag up, negative, positive, that should be negative. If I pressed here, key event vk underscore down, and if I press vk underscore down, what will happen? The value of the dy will now be 2. So, positive dito. Yan. So, key press yan. Ganyan lang. A very simple program for key press. So, ibig sabihin, mag-register na kapag ka-press natin si keyboard natin na left, right, up, down, yan yung mangyayari. So, if you would like to perform other presses here, say for example, nag-press ka ng F or space for missiles. Yan, tatawagin mo dito ngayon yung missile na object ulit. Diba? Now, for the key release, actually, hindi naman natin to kailangan gamitin. Itong si key release na to. We can just simply safely assume na pag nag-release tayo ng keyboard natin, di ba, pinindot mo si up, tapos ni-release mo, walang mangyayari So, basically, everything will be 0. Ganun siya. Magiging 0 lang siya. Nothing will simply happen if you release the keyboard. Saan nga ba nangyayari si released? Kapag mga fighting games, di ba? If you press a certain button and if you release that, something something will happen, like another attack will eventually, or a combo will happen, or whatever things na pwedeng mangyari. So in this example, wala namang mangyayari. So let's put everything into 0. Ganun siya. So I think okay na ang ating spaceship. So we have the following properties for spaceship. We also added their, yung mga accessors natin. And of course, their key pressed. So wala ka nang magiging problema sa spaceship. Okay na yan. So dito ngayon, babalik tayo sa may sprite natin. The board_sprite natin. Okay, so we set the toolkit. Okay na rin to. We set the do drawing, the casting, the position of this one. Everything is actually working perfectly fine. Do drawing, tapos si action perform, ito action perform step. Yan. Tapos si private void step. Ano yung move natin kanina dito? Yung move natin dito, ayan, simply paganyan lang siya. Diba? Nagmo-move lang basically yung spaceship mo. So tatawagin natin si spaceship.move. That's why it's also important for us to call the position -1 of the x value and the position of y value -1. Tapos yung width niya, ano lang to, pag repaint lang para mag-update lang, guys. Para mag-update doon sa mismong J-frame mo yung nangyayari every key press mo. Okay? Get height +2. Boom. Ganyan lang siya. So -1 here, sabihin pag nag-repaint. Okay, so walang problema to. Repaint eh. Okay. So, are you still missing something here? Tingnan natin kung may error pa. Ayun, may error pa tayo. Itong key listeners natin. Every particular event na ginawa natin dito, every particular key presses, this will be useless because we didn't really implemented what we call the listeners. Puro event lang eh. Diba? And sabi ko nga sa inyo lagi, napaka-importante rin na kapag ka may event, may listeners. Pag may listeners, meron ding event. Diba? So, in order for us to do this or to remove the, what do you call this one, the problem with the key listener, pwede tayo kasi yung gumawa ng panibagong class inside this class and name that as the adapter. And we will be extending the key adapter itself. Diba? So, tingnan nyo, nawala na yung error dito. Ayan o. Wala na yung error dito. Kasi nga, hindi natin siya totally in-implement eh. Hindi pa nga natin ini-inherit yung mga ginagawa ni key, yung mga presses natin. So, public void key released. We have here key release, key event E. Tapos, tatawagin natin si key release natin na which simply set everything to 0. Diba? And lastly, tatawagin natin dito si public void key pressed, in which will simply call the key pressed method. So this is actually the final piece of the puzzle because without this, whatever things na in-implement mo dito as the key events will simply go in vain. Hindi yan naandar. Kasi wala pang listener. Puro events lang ginawa mo dito eh. Wala pang listeners eh. This is how you implemented the listener. It's a separate class pero inside the class of the JPanel. Itong board_sprite natin. So kung irarun natin to, tingnan natin. Ayan. So kung irarun natin, we have here the position of the spaceship na 40 by 60. Nasaan yung initial position natin? Ito. So, if we will try to move the spaceship, ang movement niya is every 2 unit. Ayan o. Kasi, sinet natin yan na once we key press, 2 units ang movement niyan. So, kung gusto mong mabagal ang pag-andar, niyan, i-set po to up to like 1 for example, or 0 point something, para 0 point something pixels yung movement niya. Ganun siya. Ayan na. Any questions so far? Simple program, pero napakadaming code. Because the purpose of this one is actually I want everyone to appreciate the beauty of game development and stop downloading pirated games. Developers are actually putting a lot of hard times developing their games. Million lines of code. In fact, tapos ika-crack lang natin, no? So, try nating iwasan yon ang mag-crack. Kasi nararamdaman na natin, nafe-feel na natin slowly, little by little, ang challenge kung paano mag-code ng game. Simple lang to, di ba? Napaka-simple lang na program pero napakahaba agad. Sir, sorry, paki-scroll po dun sa private class. Okay, sige. Ayan ako lang, wait lang ha. Dito. Yan, private class. Sa loob yan ng after yan ng step. Yeah, ipopost ko to sa YouTube, Mr. Doughnut, don't worry. Para mas maintindihan natin. And, mabilis ba ako mag-type? Kailangan eh. Kasi para mahabol natin yung oras. Pag face-to-face classes to, definitely, pag face-to-face classes kasi everyday tayong nagmi-meet. Like, 2 hours talaga tayo sa lab every single day from Monday to Friday. So, like, for a week, we have 10 hours of meeting time. So, talagang pwede kong pabagalin yung discussion natin. Pero since 2 hours lang tayo, kailangan mabilis. Mabilis talaga. Anyways, yeah. Don't worry, Mr. Doughnut, nakapost naman ito. And, wait lang ha. For the sake of the class, nandito rin po yung mga meaning ng ating pangyayari dito sa moving sprite na to. Okay? So, basahin nyo lang tong part na to. I simply put this part of the code in the module para at least magkaroon kayo ng idea kung para saan nga ba ulit. Kasi maybe you keep on asking yourself, ano nga bang purpose na itong step method na to? Para saan na nga ba to? Diba? So, ganun po siya. So, mag-implement tayo dito ng next na mayon. May shooting missiles na. Yan. Shooting missiles. Abot pa ba na oras? Yeah. I still have 20 minutes para dito. Pero nakakatuwa to eh. Kasi may umaandar na. Umaandar na siya. For the missiles, kaya yan ako na lang to. Tago ko muna yung mga ibang parts dito ng code. We have the sprite, we have the missile, we have the spaceship. Mahaba-haba ito. 268 lines of code. Diba? 268 lines of code agad yan. Na, alam mo yun, nagsishoot lang ng missiles. So, paano pa kaya kapag diba? Kapag may kalaban na. That will be discussed next week. Yung tinatawag natin na hit detection, yung collision. Once na yung missile pumunta dun sa kalaban, what will happen? Sasabog. Magkakaroon ka ng score. Diba? So, that's little by little, nagiging game na yung napaka-simple natin. Napaka-simple na game natin. Most of the games in the generation of SNES, family computers, Nintendo, ganyan ang pagkaka-implement nila. Ang tawag dito? Napakahaba ng pagkaka-implement nila nung araw. Okay, so burahin ko to. Tapos proceed tayo dito sa shooting missiles. Don't worry, pero kasi ko na lang to eh. Copy-paste ko na lang tong part na to. Yan. And so, yung main method natin for the missiles, this time maglalagay tayo ng missile, no? So, para hindi na natin ulitin yung ginawa natin kanina, kaka-copy-paste ko lang ulit yung mga part ng code natin dito, which is the class. This time, ang pangalan kasi dito is board_sprite. Pero this time, papalitan ko yung pangalan niya na class board_shoot. And I'll extend. the JPanel, I'll implement action listener. Oops. Yan. So, override ulit natin si paint component. Copy-paste ko na lang to. Tapos, si action perform natin. Okay. In the action performed here, this is where we will be updating the missiles. Yan. This is where we will be updating the missiles. And we will be updating the spaceship class natin. Okay? Tapos meron tayong repaint. Mamaya natin gagawin yan. Ganyan po. Gawin muna natin yung importanteng mailagay dito. So, override annotation, yung do drawing natin. Okay. The do drawing should be placed somewhere. Bahala na. Dito na lang siguro. Or dito na lang. Para makita ko agad. Yan. Ang missile kasi, guys, panibago siyang class. And since panibago siyang class, it's really important for us to take note that if you are trying to put another set of, like for example, character, magsaset ka kasi ng properties ng character doon pa lang. Panibagong code yun eh. Isang character, panibagong code agad yun. Isang missile, panibagong code agad yun. Okay? So, isa-isahin naman natin yan and we will try to recreate the entire program here. Okay? So, graphics 2D, tapos dito yung draw image, yung position niya, yung ginawa natin dito kanina. The spaceship. This is where the spaceship. Sige, kopyahin nyo lang. Okay. So, constructor tayo. Private final int yung position ng craft natin, yung spaceship natin. So, 40 iCraft _ x. Next is the position of our craft or the spaceship. Gawin natin siyang 60. Then, the position yan, of the delay into 10. The timer. And, again, we will call the spaceship. Yan, the spaceship class na ginawa natin kanina. So, gayon, gawin natin si constructor. Board _ shoot. Board _ shoot. Bakit dalawa? Yan. And board _ shoot here will simply call the init board, in which is a private void init board. Yan. So, parang yung ginawa natin kanina dito, listener, t-adapter, tapos set background, color.black. Black ba yung, yeah, base, yan. Tapos yung focusable natin is true. Wala lang yan, pero lagay nyo lang basta para lang mag-update yung nangyayari. So, we will now be instantiating the spaceship. Yan. With the following position. Initial position of like that. We will be instantiating the timer and its delay into 10. Ang 10, no? 10 ang ano natin eh. Delay ng timer natin. Tapos, timer.start. Boom. Yan na. So, babalik tayo ulit sa spaceship. Yung parang kanina lang kung paano natin in-implement si spaceship. So, i-copy-paste ko na lang ulit yung spaceship natin dito. Nasa ba yung spaceship ko kanina dito? Separate class siya, spaceship. Yan. So, for the spaceship, kung napansin nyo, we have produced here an error, which is the sprite and the missile. Because what will happen here is that ang ginagawa talaga na itong part na to, for now, simply call all of the components ni Sprite, which is another, okay, which is another class na gagawin natin. Separate din eh. Magiging separate class yan. And meron din tayo ditong missile. Yan. Yung Sprite kasi na yan, yan yung magiging bala ng missile mo. So kapag ka nag-space ka, yung missile mo gumaganyan, di ba? Umaandar, gumaganyan-ganyan siya. So kung napansin nyo, nawala yung ano natin, yung error natin dito. So napaka-importante talaga ng object-oriented programming sa game development, I'm telling you. Especially dito pa lang sa mga napaka-basic pa lang na sample natin. Very basic, but then it is somehow difficult to understand agad-agad. Diba? So, iyan muna natin to. Tago ko muna to. Tago ko rin muna si dalawang classes natin dito. And let's go back dito sa my board underscore shoot natin. Here in the board underscore shoot, papasok tayo ngayon dito sa my do drawing. Dito sa do drawing. So as I have mentioned here, this is where we will be placing the image and at the same time, the missiles itself. Yung sa may ano kasi, sa may do drawing kasi natin, ito, yung kung natatandaan yung ginawa natin kanina dito sa do drawing natin in which we simply draw the image, tapos we set, copy paste ko na nga lang ito. Nasaan ba yung draw image ko dito kanina? Ito. Itong part na to. Diba ganyan lang yan kanina? Yan. So, it's the same. It's actually the same process. But then, it still produce an error kasi hindi pa naman totally tapos yung program natin dito sa part na to. Sa my class spaceship natin, in which we will try to do that one by one as well. Okay, mag-alala. Gagawin natin yan. Para, ano ba yun? Para hindi tayo mahirapan. Pero alam ko mahirap na, no? Pahirap na ng pahirap ang programming. Siyempre, ganyan talaga. Pero wag kayong mag-alala, ang activity nyo lang naman dito is to simply redo the entire code again on your own. So, you have to watch, rewatch, re-understand everything ng maayos. So, pasok tayo dito sa may do drawing. Nagka-error pala kasi 2D lang yung nilagay ko. Ay, nako. Yan. Now, for the missiles, I would like to introduce to you what we call the list in Java. Ang linked list kasi, it works as the same like array. Ini-store natin yung mga values. This time, hindi sa container, but then sa specific list na siya. So, ibig sabihin, yung missile na to, dito ngayon niya mailalagay sa list na yan. So, yan, nag-instantiate tayo dito or di tayo totally nag-instantiate pero nilalagay lang natin si missiles sa list. Okay? And for every missile na pipindutin natin, for every missile na lalabas, ayan, tama ba yung spelling ko ng missiles? Double S, no? It should be double S. Ayan. Ayan. For every missiles na lalabas, take note, for every missiles na lalabas, we need to draw the image for the missile itself. Get image. Ayan. Tapos missile dot get X. Mag-error pa yan kasi hindi pa natin siya ini-implement. Missile.get Y. This. Ayan. So, G2D, draw image, missile.get image, add. So, for now, let's make this one the update missiles. We will call this as well. We will call the update spaceship dito sa action performed. Marami, no? Maraming nangyayari. Napakadami. Alam ko, napakadami nangyayari. So, for updating the spaceship, yun yung una natin munang i-work out dito. For updating the spaceship, just like what we have done earlier, update spaceship here, we will just simply call the spaceship.move. Yung spaceship.move, saan yan makikita? Dito po sa, itong move na to. Diba? Yung move na yan. And we have here the, mamaya ako explain yung, naglagay ako ng fire dyan eh. So, spaceship.move tayo. And I think it's safe to assume na pwede na nating ilagay si T adapter. Teka, nailagay ko na ba si T adapter dito? Yes, nailagay ko na nga dito. T adapter, private class T adapter, extends key adapter. And this time, copy-paste lang natin yung T adapter kanina. Para gumana yung process natin dito. Yan. So, spaceship.key release, spaceship.key pressed. So, we are now in the process of updating the missiles. Private void update missiles. Ayan. So, mamaya natin ito i-work on. Kasi, ang purpose ni update missiles, once you have clicked on space, diba, ang purpose ito, pag nag-click ka ng space, in which dito mangyayari, ayan, pag nag-click ka ng space, you will call a new method in which fire, let's call that as fire method, in which simply add a new missile. Take note, nag-add ka ng panibagong missile for every time na nagpe-press ka ng space. Yan. Ganun po siya. And kung i-review natin kasi itong si class spaceship natin, this is actually where we number one, we call the spaceship, di ba? The spaceship constructor, super X and Y. Mamaya, may error pa talaga yan. We call here the init spaceship in which we load the image. We also get its image dimensions. Yan. So, public void move. Yan. And the public list missiles in which yung get missiles natin, saan natin nakuha? Dito. Yan. Sa missiles na yan. Tapos yung key events natin. Don't worry, mawawala yung mga errors natin later on. Madali lang namang ma-resolve yan eh. Kasi, syempre, may kulang-kulang pa tayo ng ano natin. ng program. Na-work na natin si spaceship, di ba? Na-work na natin si spaceship. Na-work na rin natin yung implementation sa baba niya. Especially once we have pressed the fire button, which is the space. Now, let's try to work with the Sprite classes. Ang Sprite classes kasi, dito ngayon papasok yung image icon natin na yung mga error para ma-resolve natin yung mga error. So, you have protected int width, protected int height. Yan. Protected, ano yun? Boolean ba yun? Tama. True or false. Kailangan ko ng true or false eh. If the missile is visible, protected image as well. So, we have here the public sprite. Implementation lang ito ng properties lang. This.x, itututo ko yan kay x para makuha ni class spaceship tong mga value natin. We will set the visibility into true. Kung pansin nyo, nawala na rin yung error natin dito sa super. So, ibig sabihin ni super, tinawag natin itong protected values na to. Protected void load image. We will call this as well. Yan. Si load image naman, I'll name that as image name, in which ang image name natin is image icon II is equal to new image icon image name. So, medyo mag-extend tayo ng konti sa time na. Okay lang yan. Ngayon lang naman. Image is equal to ii.getImage. So, nawala na rin yung error natin dito. Diba? So, let's call the getImage dimension. Protected void getImage dimension. Dimensions ba? Dimensions, tama. Dimensions. Yan. And this time, we will be setting the width, which is null. We will also be setting the height, which is also null. Again, properties lang po ito ha. Sineset ko lang yung properties natin ng missile and ng kung ano-ano natin ilalagay. So, public, especially yung image. Get image. We will return the image itself. Tapos mali. Hindi dyan. Dito. Public int get x. Yan. We will return the x value. Get y. We will return the y value. Guys, this is normal in programming. Ha? Huwag po kayong alam mo yun, normal talaga to. Ganito talaga ang programming, especially kapag nasanay ka na rin. Kasi once you are developing your own game, masasanay ka, lahat na ng implementation ng kung ano-ano, medyo magiging familiar ka na talaga. Is visible, wala pa palang laman to, sorry. If it is visible, true or false ang ibabato nito. Public Boolean set visible. Boolean visible. Yan. This not visible. Okay. Excuse me. So, nawala ng error natin kay spaceship. Diba? So, wala ka ng problema dito. Except dito. Because we are still missing the missile. Hindi pa natin totally ini-implement sa missile. Ayan o. Although si spaceship is okay na, pero hindi pa natin totally na-implement ng kompleto yung program natin. So, let's try to implement the missile, but then this time, we will be getting or inheriting the class Sprite. So, lahat ng mga value, lahat ng properties ni Sprite, mapupunta rin kay missile. So, let's declare the following variables here. The width of the entire board, in which that is 390, and the missile speed into 2. Yan. For the constructor, public missile, we have int x, int y, and we will be calling the superclasses in which we declared from the sprite variable x and y. And tapos tatawagin natin si init missile because we will be setting the missile itself. So, private void init missile. Yung pangalan ng missile natin, guys, is missile.png and it looks something like this. Okay? So, i-load natin yung image. Load image src missile.png. Tapos, get image dimensions. And this time, gagawa tayo ng movement ni missile. Move. And x plus equals yung missile speed natin. Ano yung missile speed natin? 2. So, ibig sabihin, pag nag-fire tayo ng missile, every 2 units lang ang under niya. Pakanan. Yan. If the missile position is actually, or it hits the board width, which is 390, yung pinakadulo ng J-frame mo, the visibility of the missile will now be false. Sabihin, once na na-reach niya yung dulo, mawawala na yung visibility ng missile mo. Gets? So, ganun po siya. Ano siya, ang tawag dito? Ito, visible dapat to. Ayan. Set visibility lang siya. Yan, so okay na pala eh. Oh, okay na. Missile, maikli lang tong si missile natin. Napaka daling magawa. Si Sprite natin, okay na rin. Bakit ako may error dito? Ah, public boolean kasi. So, this should be void. Okay. So, may error ako eh. Ayan. So, meron na tayo. Missile, pwede na. Balik tayo sa spaceship. Okay. For the spaceship, I think we are still missing something. Tignan ko nga maigi. Take this opportunity to screenshot din ha. Para at least maano na kayo. Ang haba na ng code natin na umabot na ng 200 plus agad to. So, fire. Working na rin ng fire. Yan. Wala na rin tayong problema sa fire. Sa board shoot tayo. Dito, I think meron pa tayong problema. Ito. Yung sa spaceship natin, we still have a problem here. This should be capital S. Yan. Yan. Capital S kasi siya. Timer. We set the timer. The paint component. We're good. The do drawing. For the do drawing, for every missile, sabi ko nga, na lumalabas, i-draw mo yung missile. Okay, working yan. Action performed, update missiles, update spaceship, repaint, okay lang. For the update spaceship, we will just simply move the spaceship. Ito kulang nga. For the update missiles here, using the linked list earlier, itong ginamit natin dito na missiles, we will simply get the value of missiles here. And for every value ni missile here, yan, for every missile size, I++. Yan. We will now be calling the missiles that get. Ayun. Kukunin ko lang yung mga missile na lumalabas kumbaga. Ito lang yun, yung code na yun. So, get I. If the missile is visible, if it is true, the missile will automatically move. Okay. If the missile is not visible, the missile will now be removed. Ayan. Nakakatawa naman ito. So, working na to. Missiles.remove. T adapter for key presses. Working. And let's try to run this. I hope this will work. Dito ngayon papasok yung mga problema mo, yung mga debugging problems na may experience mo. New T adapter. This is ganyan. So, I don't have any problems with my codes. Ayun. So, nagpakita gumagana na ba yung up, down, left, right ko? Yes. How about si space? Ayun. Diba? So, pag na-reach niya yung dulo nito, yung J-frame mo, ayun pag na-reach mo yung dulo ng J-frame mo, nawawala yung missile. Diba? So, ibig sabihin, saan nagpapakita yung nawawala yung missile dyan? Ulit, dito sa may, itong part na to. Visible equals false. Sinet lang natin yung visibility ni missile into false. True or false lang yan, guys. Yung pagkakavalue niyan. So, kung napansin nyo, nag-work na siya properly. The movement of the missile is actually dependent on the speed, which is 2. So, kapag bumato ko ng isang missile dyan, 2. Every 2 units yan. So, same movement sila nung spaceship. Diba? So, kung gusto nyo baguhin yung key presses nyo, gawin yung wasad, okay lang. Kung doon kayo sanay. Diba? So, in the next meeting, maglalagay na tayo dito ng kalaban. Maglalagay tayo dito ng kalaban na kapag yung missile dumikit sa kalaban, yun. Score agad yun. What will happen, diba? So, sige. Take this time to screenshot the following codes. And you have to make sure to do this on your own, especially kung hindi kayo nakasunod dito sa discussion natin today. Because it's important for you to recreate this. Teka lang. Kasi lalabas yan dito sa may activity natin for the performance. Check. Take note. A basic program was introduced, upload the Java program, and I I really recommend po na gawin nyo to individually. Although your output will be the same as the others, mas maganda kung gagawin nyo to on your own pa rin. Wag kayong hihingi sa classmate nyo ng code, tapos ika-copy paste. Kawawa naman yung classmate nyo na umintindi ng code, di ba? Nanood ng video. Siyempre, hindi rin ako papayag. Nanonood ako ng video na 2 hours long, tapos i-share ko lang yung code na ginawa ni sir ng ganun-ganun lang, na hindi ka nakinig ng video, di ba? So, I still recommend na i-ano nyo yung video. Panoorin nyo, gawin nyo, or kung nakaka-screenshot kayo ngayon pa lang, why not? Diba? So, screenshot, missile class, the spaceship class, the key presses, the key release and the fire method, the board chute, which extends the JPanel and implements the action listener, and so now, do drawing, then action performed, tapos si T adapter, and lastly, si main method natin. So, yung magiging next example natin dito, medyo mahaba-haba ito kasi, syempre, magre-release na tayo ng mga kalaban, umaandar yung kalaban, pero yung mga kalaban na ilalagay natin, ano lang, yung position nila, preset, hindi siya random. Mahihirapan tayo pag i-random natin yung positions. Okay? Question so far? We have 271 codes. Oh my God. Lines of code. Yung next dito, mas mahaba. Abot ng 300 plus. Pahaba ng pahaba ito eh. Yeah, welcome to the real programming, by the way. This is actually the real programming. So, yung journey natin from very basic Hello World last year, nagde-develop na tayo ng napaka-basic na game. So, again, I hope na appreciate natin yung value ng game development and stop piracy. Yung Hello World ko nasa outer space na. Yeah. So, let's stop piracy, guys, ha? If kaya natin bumili ng games, mas maganda po. Ang hirap mag-develop ng games. To be honest. Hello World nasa outer space. Yeah, at least games, no, Mr. Benaventura. Okay nga yan, okay yan. May mga sample tayo dito, yung Tetris. I-discuss ko rin yung Tetris. Paghulog ng blocks, yung mga terminology, yung mga tawag doon. Basta yung mga blocks na yun, paano nagyayari yung pag-set ng ano. Tapos yung Flappy Bird, try natin gawin yung Flappy Bird kung kaya ng oras. Maganda yung Flappy Bird eh. Madali lang. Pinakamadali yung Flappy Bird actually. Meron din yung Pac-Man, tapos Space Invaders natin. So, yung Space Invaders naman, complicated din yun, pero maganda siyang gawin. If you can still, natatandaan nyo ba yung Space Invaders? Taka lang. I don't know kung inabutan nyo yun eh. Yeah, mga 8-bit games talaga tayo. Diba? Tapos, in the end, maglalagay na tayo ng audio. Pero syempre, mas panibagong ano yun eh, panibagong discussion ng audio. Ito, one of my favorite games before, mga Space Invaders. Pero yung basic lang, hindi ganyan. Pero Java kasi yan eh. Ang importante dyan, yung mga ano natin, yung sa file natin. Kung napansin nyo, you have alien, you have player, yan. Again, pwede po kayong mag-download. Pwede nyo i-change itong mga to. Pero given the fact na, tingnan nyo yung resolution niya. Ito kasi 12 by 12 pixels lang lahat na ginagamit natin. So if you're planning to use around 100 by 100 pixel, try to use a J-frame which is 1920 by 1080 para mas malaki. Diba? So, yan, Space Invaders yan. Tapos yung, pa nga ba yun? Yung Minesweeper. Pero, medyo mahirap yung Minesweeper eh. Pac-Man, yun. Pac-Man, madali ang Pac-Man, to be honest. Sa Pac-Man kasi, ang focus nyo is how the Pac-Man will simply, open and close its mouth. Para lang din siyang ito, kung paano natin in-implement si spaceship. Pero this time, yung sprite mo lumilipat eh. Gumaganyan eh. Pagka nag-press ka ng left, haharap dito. Pag nag-press ka ng right, haharap dito. So, yun yung magiging pag Pac-Man. Overview po sa final PT this sem. Ito, to be honest, we are still actually deciding, me and Sir Kles, kung magiging individual siya or per group. Because your final performance task will actually be related to game development and an implementation of the entire thing na gagawin natin. So may mga karagdagan tayong mechanics na idadagdag sa bawat activity or sample na ginagawa natin. So that's actually the entire overview. Hindi ko sure kung papayag si Mr. Clemente na gawing by group siya or individual. That will still depends. Kasi wala kayong para ito na yung pinaka assessment nyo in programming for the entire 2 years na nag-aral tayo ng programming. So, yun. Kaya mahalaga na i-code nyo tong shooting missiles na to. Okay? May question pa ba?